Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Immunosenescence. That word's interesting. Immune, obviously, immuno meaning the immune system. Senescence meaning condition of growing old or process of decaying. Now, in that word, it's not just an understanding of the word, it's an understanding of a process that I'm going to show you drives a parallel of aging and cancer. Most look at aging and cancer as something that are associated together, that cancer is a disease of the aged, and it's actually the aging process that promotes the development of cancer. But I'll actually tell you that they're actually much more related than that. They're actually parallel processes that result from the process of immunosenescence. Aging is not merely a producer of cancer, and cancer is not merely a product of aging. You know, I've talked about the four horsemen of the cancer apocalypse. That's the ultra-processed food, that's obesity, glyphosate, other pesticides, and then antibiotic overuse. Of course, there's many other components, but obviously the four horsemen of the cancer apocalypse has a great sound, right? So, and it really catches your attention there. But immunosenescence is when immune cells basically stop replicating, yet they still remain metabolically active. Now, this is important because it impairs how the immune system surveys the landscape of the body. But it is a key point and a central node to show that aging and cancer are parallel. But we have to go back earlier. See, we have to go back to the process of what's called dysbiosis. This is where we have gut microbiota imbalance within the bacteria and within the gut microbiome. And of course, this alters the gut metabolome. And as I've talked about and written about many times in a series on seeding, is this process of dysbiosis actually goes back to the mother's diet when she's pregnant. This goes back to her metabolic health. This goes back to the birth process, goes back to breastfeeding, goes back to those early days of that child. But dysbiosis, again, imbalanced gut bacteria within the colon. And so it's not just deficiency of certain bacteria like bifidobacteria, which I've talked about with the MyBabyBiome research, Lactobacillus rudi, or even others. It is actually where those bacteria are deficient, but that leaves a void for other potential pathogenic bacteria or inflammatory bacteria such as Streptococcus, Bacteroides fragilis, Faecalibacterium nucleatum, and these kind of fill that void. They're called pathobions. And what that is these are opportunistic or outright pathogenic bacteria. And so this creates local inflammation. It's imbalance in the healthy bacteria, what's called commensal bacteria. And it allows these bacteria to get in there that create pro-inflammation. This also disrupts the metabolomics in that environment. So we see a decrease in the small chain fatty acid production of butyrate, propionate and acetate. We see an alteration, a decrease in the secondary bile acids, and all of this basically, again, pro-inflammatory in that environment, but also disrupting the gut epithelial barrier, breaking down the integrins, allowing these pro-inflammatory bacteria and endotoxins such as gram-negative bacteria leaking through the gut epithelial barrier because it's down, called leaky gut, and this leads to increased systemic inflammation. So chronic immune stimulation from the dysbiosis leads to increased toll-like 4 receptor signaling, which is pro-inflammatory. It stimulates chronically nuclear factor kappa beta. It stimulates interleukin 6, a very pro-inflammatory cytokine. Tumor necrosis factor alpha is increased, and interleukin 1 beta is also increased, very significant pro-inflammatory. But what's really interesting is that this dysbiosis, it's not just something that's confined to the gut. It's not just something that increases pro-inflammation because of the breakdown in the gut, leaky gut. It actually contributes to immunosenescence. See, this immunosenescence is a chronic immune activation because of the chronic pro-inflammatory response, and this puts great stress on this system of remodeling and repair because of this ongoing pro-inflammatory response. And this stress increases further the senescent strain. So this immunosenescence, whether it's immune cells or non-immune cells, okay, actually promotes a condition called senescent-associated secretory phenotype, which means these cells, again, they're not replicating. And here we're talking specifically about immune cells, but understand this also applies to non-immune cells. So they're not replicating, but they remain metabolically active. They produce growth factors. Let's see, cancer likes that. They produce pro-inflammatory signals. Well, wow, that's pro-inflammatory signals are coming from the dysbiosis to begin with. So you start to see this vicious cycle that promotes. And this senescent-associated secretory phenotype actually starts to promote something called inflammaging, where we start to get this chronic pro-inflammation, chronic immune hyperactivation, repair on stress remodeling. Guess where aging comes from? Oh, you can't repair and remodel damaged tissue. We get accelerated aging. And so that's where this chronic inflammation, because of the immunosenescence, going back to the dysbiosis, is accelerating the inflammation, causing aging. Now we're talking about the micro level, but guess what happens? We start to see it at the tissue level. We start to see it in the macro level of the phenotype that we express. But then that inflammaging also, because of the senescent-associated secretory phenotype, starts to produce more chronic inflammation. And that starts to promote more stress on the immune repair and remodeling. And that turns right around and creates more immunosenescence, where we get decaying and basically lack of activity of the immune cells. Now, what's important there is that it starts to impair immunosurveillance, the immune system's ability and capacity to circulate throughout the body and survey for cells that need damage repair, remodeling, or outright elimination. That affects both aging and it affects cancer. Now, here's what happens when immunosenescence gets into this loop cycle. There's decreased naive T cells. There's decreased T cell receptor diversity, reducing immune cell adaptability. You have increased immune exhaustion, such as PD-1, TIM-3, and TIGIT, and this impairs immunosurveillance. This is a direct result of the basically immune stress, chronic inflammation, actually leading to immune exhaustion. They're just flat exhausted. Everybody wants to rush to the biologics such as dendritic cells and natural killer cells and T cells like interleukin 15. But if the immune cells are exhausted, won't matter. You have increased immunosuppression because you have an increase in the activation of myeloid-derived suppressing cells, T-regulating cells, promoting interleukin 10, promoting transformative growth factor beta, all immunosuppressive, and you actually have a decreased activity of CD8 cytotoxic T cells and natural killer cell activity. So what we have here is not just a process by which when we see cancer, we go, oh, this is in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. See, we're just coming out we're at the end of March, Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. Everybody's baffled. Everybody's confused about why are we seeing an earlier and earlier group of people, demographic shift of colorectal cancer and other cancers too, where more aggressive progressive disease is diagnosed at a younger age, where it used to be a disease of the 70s and 80s, the aged. It's because it's not the quantity of age that is accelerating the manifestation. It's actually the quantity of the aging at the micro level. We're accelerating the aging at the micro level. It's going back to the gut. It's going back to those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And we're accelerating this over a generation. The CDC data looking at obesity-associated mortality rates found that in obesity-associated cancers, the mortality rate from 1990 to 2020 tripled from 3.73 to 13.52 per million. That's one generation tripling of obesity-associated cancers and their mortality rates. That's dramatic. And the only way that can be explained is through impairment of the immune system. But what I'm laying out here is immunosenescence. It's the aging of the immune cells. But herein lies a very important point, I think, of distinction. It's not that we're accelerating the aging of the micro level, accelerating the aging of the individual, and then that's causing the cancer. Again, going back to the beginning of the video, it's actually parallel. See, this accelerated immune exhaustion, immune senescence, and impaired immune surveillance, promoting chronic inflammation, overactivation, repair remodeling inhibition, and further exacerbating immunosenescence, actually promoting inflammation. It promotes parallel tracks of aging and cancer. So when we look at cancer, it's accelerating. The demographics are changing. We're seeing younger, more aggressive patients because we're seeing accelerated aging at the micro level, particularly the immune system. Impaired immunosurveillance. Go back to the gut. Go back to the four horsemen of the cancer apocalypse. But we're also seeing accelerated aging, that senescence. And it goes back to the same thing, dysbiosis. Four horsemen of the apocalypse. Here, not cancer, but aging apocalypse. And guess what? When we see accelerated aging at the micro level, here, particularly talking about the immune system with immunosenescence, we're going to see accelerating manifestation, changing demographics of all aging-related cancer rates, aging-related disease rates. We are seeing disease and aging change before our very eyes. And it's because of the damage and disruption we're doing to the immune system, forcing it into an exhausted state, forcing it into a chronic inflammation state, forcing it into an aging accelerated state, impairing the immune system's ability to do its job. And just for example, when we look at cancer, what do? We come in with surgery, chemo, and radiation, and that further accelerates aging and promotes senescence. So we got to go back to the basics. We got to go back to basically identifying those four horsemen of the cancer apocalypse and the aging apocalypse and remedy them. We have to go back to the gut. We have to heal the gut. And to heal the gut, we got to go back to the soil. Most importantly, we've got to work to empower the immune system. But we can only do that by empowering the gut microbiome, balancing it. That'll balance the immune system. That'll overall improve tissue repair remodeling. That'll overall reduce inflammation. That'll overall reduce the aging associated with inflammation at the micro level. And it will empower the immune system to do its job. Protect the body against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So cancer is not a result of aging. Aging and cancer are on parallel tracks that are coming from immunosenescence, the aging and decay of the immune system. But that goes back to the gut and the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Check out the captions below for supporting evidence. As always, like, share, and subscribe.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.